They told me to sit down and shut up at my own husband's estate dinner. Sasha even said it with a laugh. Like I was some relic they couldn't figure out how to store. She's just the widow, she chuckled, twirling her wine glass like we were at a wine tasting, not the dining table Victor and I built with our bare hands 31 years ago. I smiled. Then I stood up. And by the next sunrise, the house they sat in wasn't theirs anymore. Neither were the accounts. Or the cars. Or the firm. Everything they thought was theirs was mine. Had been, actually. They just didn't know it yet. But before we get to that part, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Diana Whitlow. I'm 69 years old. And apparently, to my own family, that means I'm invisible now. I ironed my silk blouse twice before leaving that evening. Checked my lipstick 3 times. And told myself not to cry. No matter what. It was just dinner. Just family. Just the people I had loved and raised and stood beside for decades. We were gathering at my son Miles's home. The fancy cliffside property with the wraparound windows and open beam ceilings, the one he and Sasha bought with a loan Victor and I co-signed during a time we skipped our own anniversary trip just to help them get started. They never mentioned that anymore. I brought a pear tart. Victor's favorite. I'd made it from scratch that morning, hoping it might soften the mood. Or maybe soften them. I still hadn't fully accepted what we had become to each other. When I arrived, no one looked up. Miles was uncorking wine like some sommelier, and Sasha was clicking around the kitchen in heels I wouldn't wear to a wedding. Their daughter Emily gave me a quick nod, the kind you give a teacher you barely recognize. We sat at a table I gifted them last Christmas. Miles began with, "We've been thinking it's best to simplify the estate process." Sasha added, not even looking up from her phone, "You're just the widow, Diana. Maybe just stay quiet for now." There it was. I looked around the room, people who'd once needed me to braid their hair, stitch their shirts, pick them up from broken moments. And now, I was just noise in their way. I didn't cry. Didn't plead. I set my fork down, stood slowly, and walked out with my chin high and the pear tart still sitting untouched on the counter. They didn't even call after me. And they had no idea what I was about to do. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Victor's old armchair in the study, the one with the cracked leather and worn armrests where his fingers had left faint indents over the years. The pear tart was still in the backseat of my car. Untouched. Just like me. The room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Their words kept replaying. "You're just the widow." Like I hadn't helped build every inch of this family. Like I didn't know every inch of what Victor and I owned. Or thought I did. I stood up sometime after midnight. Pacing. Then I paused near the old walnut cabinet against the far wall, the one we never let anyone touch. The no-go drawer, Victor used to call it when the kids were young. Inside were documents, passports, old licenses, birth certificates. All the bones of a life. My hands were trembling as I opened it. At the very back, beneath a worn envelope of tax returns and a yellowing deed from 1984, I saw it. A blue folder. Thick. Rubber-banded. Labeled in Victor's handwriting. For Diana. If they ever try. My knees buckled, but I didn't sit. I walked it to the desk, turned on the brass lamp, and peeled back the band. The top sheet was a letter. Lined paper. Victor's penmanship, always too neat for an architect. If you're reading this, it means they've made a move. I wanted to tell you earlier, but I knew you'd try to save them. Don't. Protect yourself first. Everything is in your name. The firm, the house, the accounts, even the cabin. All legal. All notarized. All final. They don't know. And they won't, unless you decide they should. Don't let them laugh you out of your own life. You were always the spine of this family. Show them what it means to stand tall. I stared at it so long, the edges began to blur. Behind the letter were documents, thick, notarized, stamped, signed by our estate lawyer, Edgar Monroe. Legal transfers. Restructured ownerships. Power of attorney papers. All dated 7 months before Victor passed. During the same season he told me he was taking care of things quietly. He had done all of this behind the scenes. Not out of secrecy, out of protection. At 3:12 a.m., I picked up the old landline. Edgar answered groggily after the 4th ring. "It's Diana," I said, voice steady. "I figured," he replied softly. "You found it. I want to activate everything. Today." There was a pause. Then, "Good. I'll be at your place by 9. By the time the first birds started singing outside my window, I had already showered, dressed, and pinned my hair the way Victor used to like it, soft at the sides, twisted low at the back. The blue folder sat on my kitchen table like a silent declaration of war. At exactly 8:57 a.m., Edgar rang the bell. He still wore the same brown coat he'd had since our sons were in high school. Familiar. Reliable. With him was a younger paralegal I didn't know, and a briefcase that clicked open like a vault. We sat at the dining table, the one my son told me to stay quiet at just hours earlier. And I began to take it back. We reviewed each document. Line by line. Clause by clause. Edgar explained every trigger point Victor had inserted: automatic asset transfers upon death, dissolution of the family trust, sole signatory rights shifted to me. Nothing had been left to chance. Victor anticipated all of this, Edgar said, tapping the signature line. He knew they'd come for it. I didn't answer. I just signed. 6 signatures. 3 initials. 1 thumbprint for verification. Each stroke of the pen felt like a match striking against damp wood, slow, but ready to burn. By 11:30 a.m., I had legal control over every major asset: the Cliffside house, the 2 commercial properties tied to Victor's firm, the business accounts, the lake cabin in upstate Vermont, even the brokerage and retirement funds. It was all mine now, legally, irrevocably. At 12:17 p.m., the first ping came in. A text from Miles. Hey, weird question. Do you know why the cabin account says access restricted? I didn't answer. 12 minutes later, Sasha called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was sweet and slow at first, like she was rehearsing for a dinner party. Then she snapped. If you've done something dramatic, Diana, we need to fix this before it gets messy. I smiled. At 5:05 p.m., I pulled into their driveway, folder in hand. Miles opened the door with a puzzled look, trying to force a smile. Mom? I stepped inside, placed the blue folder on the granite counter Sasha was so proud of, and said calmly, you might want to sit down. They didn't. Of course not. So I opened the folder. This is the new estate plan. Everything is under my name. Everything. Sasha didn't move at first. Just stood there, arms folded, eyes narrowed at the documents like they were written in a language she didn't know, or didn't want to understand. Miles laughed once. A short, breathy thing. You can't just move money around, Mom. That's not how this works. I met his eyes, level. Victor dissolved the trust last year. You didn't read the fine print. Sasha snapped her head toward him. You said the trust was safe. You said. I handed her the last page. A notarized, stamped confirmation of trust dissolution and ownership transfer. She scanned it in silence. The blood drained from her face. This isn't possible, she muttered. It's done, I replied. And now, I think it's time we talk about what you did with the money. They both froze. I opened a second envelope. Inside were transaction records. Edgar had pulled them that morning while I signed over the final documents. Business account withdrawals. Unauthorized. Labeled as vendor payments. But there were no vendors. One was for $14,000, marked professional retreat. Another for $86,000, used for the down payment on Sasha's Lexus. A string of them totaling $320,000, all pulled within 7 months of Victor's first chemo treatment. I laid them out on the counter, neat and silent, like evidence in a courtroom. Miles, I said softly, did you really think no one would notice? His face twitched. Dad told me to, he would have wanted. No, I said, voice tightening. Victor trusted you. And you emptied his accounts while I was driving him to appointments. Sasha stepped in, desperate. It was for the business. We reinvested, into tile backsplashes? Ski trips? A backyard sauna? She opened her mouth again, but I raised my hand. I'm not pressing charges. Not yet. But I've already frozen every account linked to these withdrawals. You'll need to explain them to the IRS if I don't like what I hear next week. Miles looked at me then, really looked, like he was just realizing I was no longer the woman who used to wait in the car during the meetings. You're going to ruin this family over numbers? He spat. No, I said calmly. You did that when you stole from your father's grave. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving the paper trail behind like a lit fuse. I thought they might try to reason with me. Or maybe throw guilt at me like a net, hoping I'd get tangled in it. But instead, Sasha went for something darker. 2 mornings later, an envelope slid under my front door. No return address. Just my name typed in shaky capital letters. Inside was a single page, a psychiatric evaluation request. Not signed. Not yet filed. But marked with an aggressive red circle around the words, capacity assessment recommended. I knew what this was. An attempt to claim I was mentally unfit to manage the estate. I'd seen enough legal filings during Victor's firm reviews to recognize this exact setup, the first move in a quiet, dirty strategy. It was cowardice disguised as concern. They were trying to take everything back. Through force, if not through fraud. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I drove straight to Edgar's office and placed a page on his desk without a word. He looked it over once, eyebrows rising. This was backdated. He flipped it, found the forged notary stamp. And illegal. I said just one word. Trace. 3 days later, Edgar called me back. His voice had a sharpness I hadn't heard since Victor's memorial. It was Sasha. She leaned on an old friend of hers, a notary, and tried to get the form backdated and signed off. But she got sloppy. One of the notary's assistants reported it. She didn't want to commit a felony on a Sunday morning, Edgar said. She turned over the emails. I exhaled slowly. Press charges. That's already in motion. That evening, as I sat sipping coffee on the porch, a sheriff's car pulled into Miles's driveway across town, just as they were unloading groceries from a borrowed SUV. Sasha screamed like it was theater. Miles shouted and tried to intervene, but the deputy held him back with one firm hand on the chest. The cuffs clicked before the neighborhood even knew what was happening. I wasn't there to see it. But Emily, my granddaughter, called me an hour later. Her voice was quiet. Grandma, Mom got arrested. She tried to say it was your fault. She paused, then whispered, but no one believed her. Not even Dad. I closed my eyes and said what I knew was true. Some people don't break, sweetheart. They rot. From the inside out. She didn't say anything after that. But I could hear her breathing on the line. And for the first time in weeks. It didn't sound afraid. That night, I opened a new folder. I labeled it in thick black ink, ashes. Not out of spite. But because that's what was left of the family I used to know. And it was time to clear the smoke. I spread the documents across my dining table, the same one I used to set for Thanksgiving with Victor, with name cards and cloth napkins. Now, it was a war desk. Within 24 hours, I had terminated the lease on Miles's office, which was still legally under the Whitlow Trust Corporation, reclaimed the SUV Sasha called a gift from hard work, which had been leased in Victor's name, froze the joint investment portfolio they had been siphoning into a renovation fund, pulled title on the lake cabin, preparing it for sale. Everything they touched was tied to my signature now. And I had the pen. The next morning, I made one call, just one. To Miles. It rang twice before voicemail picked up. I left a message. You might want to get a lawyer. And a very cheap apartment. Then I hung up and made myself breakfast. By noon, Edgar called to tell me Miles had tried to access the frozen business account from his office computer. Both attempts were flagged. Logged. Documented. Let him dig, I said. Let him realize how deep the hole goes. That evening, a new number appeared on my caller ID. It was Trevor, my youngest. The quiet one. The one who always stayed on the sidelines and called it keeping the peace. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone to hear him. Mom, I didn't know about any of this. I thought the trust would just stay in place. I didn't even realize Miles and Sasha were pushing for control. I paused. Let the silence hang. Then I said, flatly, you had every chance to ask me directly. His breath caught. You didn't. That silence, that's your signature. He didn't respond. Just hung up. That night, I roasted a chicken. Mashed potatoes. A small plate of lemon-dressed greens. A quiet meal. For one. I poured myself a glass of wine, stared out the window at the sharp blue dusk, and felt something settle in my chest. Not revenge. Not victory. Just weightlessness. For the first time since Victor's death, I wasn't holding my breath anymore. And I was just getting started. The invitation came in the form of a polite email. Subject line, Family Reset Dinner. Miles wrote it himself. Which meant Sasha wasn't allowed near a keyboard anymore. He used soft words. Things like reconnect, restore, and rebuild. As if this whole saga had been a glitch in the software of family, and not an intentional system crash. I didn't go to forgive anyone. I went because sometimes, the people who try to erase you need to see you standing taller than ever. I wore the pearl brooch Victor gave me on our 40th anniversary. Not flashy. Just solid. Like the love we built from drywall and secondhand furniture and nights skipping dinner to pay bills. When I walked in, Miles looked startled. Trevor hovered in the background, shoulders stiff, unsure of where to stand. Emily sat at the far end of the table, I starting between us, clutching a glass of water like a life vest. Sasha wasn't there. Part of her plea deal with the state required 6 months of no contact with me. Small mercies. Miles stood at the head of the table, the same spot where, just weeks earlier, he'd poured wine and said, "Let's simplify things." Now, he looked thinner. Less sure of himself. Like even he no longer believed the performance. He opened with a speech about storms and healing. I didn't listen. I waited. Then I stood. Set a manila folder on the table, my last one. The only file I needed now. "This isn't a reconciliation," I said. "This is a reckoning." They froze. I laid out the final audits, the court summaries, the notarized statements. Then closed the folder without ceremony. "You called me just the widow," I said, voice steady. "But I wasn't silent when I built this family. I wasn't silent when I held it together. And I sure as hell won't be silent now that I've taken it back." No one spoke. Not even Trevor. I let that silence stretch, long and clean like a surgical thread. Then I added, "This table? This room? I own them. Legally. Emotionally. Structurally. You're guests now. And guests remember their place." I picked up my coat, turned to the door. Just before I left, I glanced back and said, "You don't have to like me. You just have to understand. I'm done shrinking so you can feel tall." Then I walked out into the night. Free. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee cup, watching sunlight stretch across the tile. The house was quiet. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Later that day, I drove to Victor's old cabin, the one up near Bar Harbor with the creaky porch swing and shutters he painted yellow because they reminded him of his grandmother's house. I walked through every room. Touched every beam. The place smelled like cedar and dust and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That afternoon, I called Emily. She picked up on the first ring. "I want you to have it," I said. "The cabin?" She whispered. "Yes. It's already in your name. The deed's signed. You didn't ask for anything. And you never looked away." She cried. Not performative tears, not the kind her mother specialized in. These were soft and stunned, like something cracked open inside her. "I don't deserve this," she said. I smiled. "Exactly why you do." That same week, I met with a nonprofit consultant to launch something Victor and I had talked about in our quietest dreams, the Whitlow Fund for Widowed Women in Architecture. A grant to help women over 60 who were pushed aside, told to sit down, stay quiet, or hand over control simply because their husbands had died. We funded it with the proceeds from selling Victor's old firm. No press release. No plaque. Just action. The first applicant was from Ohio. Her kids emptied her retirement account the day after the funeral. I approved her granting 47 minutes. And I smiled. Because that's what Victor would have done, without ever needing to say a word. Final reflection: some people think silence is weakness. But real power doesn't shout. It moves. It decides. It rebuilds. When they tried to erase me, I didn't scream. I just took back the pen, and rewrote everything. And I wasn't bitter. I was free.